All right. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome and thank you for joining us for this official launch of the final study report of our Space4Women landmark study on gender equality in the global space sector, the second research phase. Thank you so much for joining us. And without further ado, I think we'll start now with the opening remarks from the UNOOSA director, Aarti Holla-Maini. Aarti, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, partners, friends, everybody who's joining us today, thank you very much for being here as we launch the second phase of our landmark study, Space4Women, on gender equality in the global space sector. Now, the space sector has always stood for ambition and for discovery. We all know that, and for breaking boundaries. But I wonder, can we truly celebrate these values if women remain so underrepresented in our field? The data that we see from this study and from other research is really sobering. In our first phase last year, we found that women make up only 30% of the public space force worldwide. And the higher you look in leadership, the smaller that share becomes. This is not a challenge that we can afford to ignore. And that's why this study really matters. The second phase, it goes far beyond statistics. It looks really at the voices of women working in space across public agencies and across companies. When we discussed with them, they told us about the barriers that they face, the biases that they endure, the cultural hurdles that really slow them down. But at the same time, they also spoke of resilience and of progress that they do see emerging, and of their determination to really help reshape this sector. The findings of the study are clear. There are encouraging signs of change, particularly in the private sector, where startups and entrepreneurs are demonstrating what inclusive leadership can really look like. But still, for too many women, bias, unequal treatment, and limited opportunity are still daily realities. Many of them describe their frustration with leadership that often speaks about inclusion, but doesn't actually act to do anything about it. So what do we do now with this knowledge? It's up to us to make gender equality real and not just a slogan. That means creating safe, supportive workplaces where women and girls can thrive. It means using practical tools like our gender mainstreaming toolkit that we developed together with the Canadian Space Agency, which helps organizations embed equality into their structures and their culture. Diversity has to be welcomed and it must be expected as something which is the norm in all organizations. We also need to empower women and girls everywhere to dream and pursue careers in space, regardless of their background and regardless of where they're from. No barriers, no limits. This phase of the study reveals something deeper, that in many regions, the roots of inequality begin long before the workplace. Girls are still denied access to quality STEM education. Without that foundation, ambition itself becomes a luxury, and this education divide must be bridged. It makes me think back to the expert meeting that we held in Nairobi, and where I think it was a colleague from Costa Rica who was with us, and he was remembering when he was young. It was him and his sister, and while he was given a gift of a telescope as a child, his sister was given the gift of a doll. And so we see how, the inequalities, the different treatments start already very young. So at UNOOSA, through our Space4Women program, we really are committed to bridging this divide. We support evidence-based policy making, mentorship, and research opportunities. Our ambition is simple, but it's also urgent, to open doors for women and girls to access STEM education worldwide and to lay the foundations of a space sector that is not just innovative, but also inclusive and sustainable. I want to express my sincere thanks to the Republic of Korea, the Korea Aerospace Administration, and the Korea Aerospace Research Institute for the generous support that they've given UNOOSA and for the partnership that we have shared now over quite a few years. And above all, my gratitude goes to the so many women who shared their stories with us. Their voices are what makes this report possible. The study really is more than a document. It's a call to action, a call to policymakers, to organizations, and to each of us, a call to shape the space sector that truly reflects humanity in all its diversity and that drives innovation not for the few, but for all. You know, when we come to Vienna, when we sit in COPUS meetings, we look, especially myself, my deputy, the chairs of the different committees, we look at from the podium at the participants. And at COPUS, we're so lucky we see so many women on the different delegations. But that's not reflective of what the sector as a whole looks like. I'm very proud of the fact that the work that we're doing at UNOOSA is very real and tangible. Concrete studies that give real valuable evidence and based on metrics, but also the gender mainstreaming toolkit, which is not just a policy paper. It's not a policy paper at all. I mean, it really is a toolkit with practical hints and steps that organizations can take. I'm all about results and impact, and I do believe that the work that we've done under this flagship program of the office is very much in that vein. So I thank all of you for supporting us in that endeavor. I'm very proud that we have Anne-Claire leading it from within our office. And I hope that we will continue to really make the most out of this new phase of the study that we've done. Thank you so much. It's a bit early here in New York, so I'm not looking my best. I've only slept for 6 hours, but thanks for having me with you and giving me the opportunity to introduce this study.
Thank you so much, Aarti, for your opening remarks. Thank you so much for joining us from New York, from the General Assembly. I would like now to pass on the floor to Ms. Gunhee Park, Deputy Director of the International Affairs Division at the Korea Aerospace Administration. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Very
Yes.
well.
Excellent. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, wherever you're joining from. I'm Gunhee Park. I serve as Deputy Director, as introduced, in the International Affairs Division of the Korea Aerospace Administration, KASA. It is both an honor and a privilege to deliver these opening remarks on behalf of KASA at today's online launch of the Phase 2 report of the Space4Women landmark study. Let me begin by expressing our sincere appreciation to UNOOSA and especially to its director, Ms. Aarti Holla-Maini, for their outstanding leadership in advancing this important study. Their dedication has been instrumental in ensuring that gender equality is now recognized as an essential part of the Space 2030 agenda and in bringing us together here today. As you all know, space activities are expanding at an unprecedented pace. Yet true progress in space cannot be measured by technology alone. It also depends on who is included in this journey. Broad and inclusive participation is essential, not only as a matter of business, but because it enriches our collective efforts with diverse perspectives and greater creativity. And this is especially true for women. Although they represent half the world's population, they remain significantly underrepresented in the space sector. And this gap is not due to any lack of talent, ambition, or vision, but to enduring barriers, both visible and invisible, rooted in cultural norms, systemic biases, and institutional practices. Overcoming these requires not just awareness, but deliberate and coordinated action. And this is why the Space4Women project is so important. It provides a global platform where countries and institutions can share perspectives, engage in dialogue, and work together towards meaningful change. And at the heart of this initiative stands a landmark study, the first comprehensive global assessment of the status of women in the space sector, and a historic step forward. The Republic of Korea is proud to have contributed to this effort. In 2022, we co-hosted the Space4Women expert meeting with UNOOSA, where one of the key recommendations was to call for a standardized global approach for collecting and analyzing gender disaggregated data. Korea embraced this recommendation wholeheartedly. And indeed, when we examined our own national statistics several years ago, we saw clearly that women were underrepresented in our space workforce. This recognition spurred us to act. We launched a national program to support the training and development in the space sector, an effort which continues to this day. We also made a decision to support UNOOSA in implementing this very landmark study. You will see details in the upcoming presentations, but the findings of phase 2, together with those of phase 1, published last year, provide valuable new insights. They sharpen our understanding of the persistent challenges women face, while also shedding light on issues that have previously been overlooked. With this knowledge, countries and institutions can design more effective and space policies. Importantly, this study calls on all of us to reflect, engage, and take concrete actions that can drive systemic change. Before I conclude, I would like to once again express our gratitude to UNOOSA, to Director Holla-Maini, all those who contributed their time, expertise, and commitment to this study. In particular, I extend our thanks to Ms. Aarti and Mr. Aarti of UNOOSA for their guidance, and also to Elise for her dedicated work in implementing this study. Let me close by reaffirming that Korea remains committed to working with the United Nations and all of our partners to ensure that gender equality and inclusiveness in the space sector become not just aspirations, but realities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Park, for your opening remarks, and we would like to reiterate, so as Aarti said, our big thanks to the Republic of Korea and especially the Korean Aerospace Administration. Thank you so much. Maybe allow me to go back a bit backward also to explain you what is the context of the study and why it has been done, and to replace it a bit in the broader picture. So looking at our slides, if I can, Martin, have the spotlight on the slides, please. Yes, perfect. Thank you. So looking at the broader picture, I would like to introduce you to the Space4Women program for the ones who don't know about it yet. But the study is actually one project of the Space4Women program, and we have several streams of activities that are presented on these slides. So first of all, we have a dedicated website. You have the link here where we actually post all the news, all the projects that we are launching, all the articles, and all our main activities are there. We also have a mentorship program that is operating since 2020. We had 3 editions so far in 2021 and 23, and we hope to resume it very soon, where we have mentors from all the space sectors, not only the technical and engineering side, but also on the law side and on the economic side. So this is really the broad spectrum of the space sector. We also organize expert meetings. We organized 5 editions so far. The first one was in 2017, organized in cooperation with UN Women at the UN headquarters in New York. The second one was in 2021 with the cooperation between Brazil, and that was hosted in the UAE. In 2022, in the Republic of Korea. In 2023, in Canada, and in 2024, in Kenya. We also conduct research and we produce capacity building materials. You maybe have heard about our gender mainstreaming toolkit that was published last year, supported by Canada. And the study is actually one of these outcomes. So looking at the next slide, we will see that the study is actually two-folded. So going a bit back in the time, the study is actually one of the outcomes from the 3rd expert meeting that was held in the Republic of Korea in 2022. That was actually one of the recommendations of our experts, because the experts actually pointed at the lack of relevant data on gender equality and women's representation in the space sector, which was one of the big challenge to tackle. So we decided to actually conduct this landmark study with the support from the Republic of Korea. The first phase, because we have heard a lot about this study actually in 2024, because it was the first phase. The first phase is about understanding women's representation and policy uptake in the space sector, so that it is much more quantitative. We wanted to have a quantitative view of what is actually the women's representation within the public space sector. Now, going to the second phase, we are really diving a bit deeper, actually, because we really wanted to understand about, we wanted to have a more qualitative overview of the situation and going deeper within the experience of the women, what are the barriers that they face, whether they want to enter the space sector, whether it is to thrive and stay within the space sector. So we really wanted to go a bit deeper to understand their experience, and also with the second part of this study, which is dedicated to the private sector. So this second phase is also two-folded itself. First of all, understand women's experience in space, and second of all, understand women's representation and policy uptake in the private sector in the way that we have done it already in the first phase. So I think I have talked enough. So I think maybe it is time now to look at the content of this second phase. We will have now the presentation of the findings. If we can go to the next slide, thank you. You can actually scan the QR code on your screen. Yes, you can scan the QR code on your screen and you can access the final report directly. And now I'm going to let the floor to Elise Stephenson, who was the lead researcher for this study and who is also our consultant at UNOOSA. But she is also the Deputy Director of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership of the Australian National University. Thank you, Elise, for being here, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anne-Claire, and thank you so much to UNOOSA for hosting this event, and to the phenomenal sponsors and scholars who contributed all across the sector. And I just really wanted to make that really important note that I think has been made so far, which is that this is a truly global study, and it has taken efforts from a lot of different people and governments and space agencies and private sector organisations. So thank you for having me here today, and thank you again for everyone's participation, funding and support of this initiative. To go to the first slide and tell you a little bit more about this study. This study has been taken with a very global look. So every single member state of the United Nations was invited to share the call for participation for this research. We contacted them through permanent missions alongside targeted outreach, including to space organisations, gender equality networks and women's networks, and broader diversity networks across the sector, as well as to private sector organisations, big conferences and peak bodies. As Anne-Claire shared, our intention is to understand experiences on the one hand for the first study, but also to understand kind of what was happening in the private sector, particularly amongst new space actors who are increasingly having a really important role to play in the sector, and as you'll see, really leading the way when it comes to gender equality as well. When it comes to the methodology that we chose, we tried to be as broad as possible. So as well as an extensive global literature review of the existing studies, we conducted key informant interviews with sector leaders. We also included focus groups specifically across the world, as well as a survey. Feeding into this was a lot of co-design workshops and discussions that didn't form part of the final data set, however, did provide a lot of really important insights into the kinds of questions we should be asking and the information that the sector really wanted to hear. For the second study, we were really honoured to have got 41 private sector organisations share their data openly with us, data on representation, on policies, on pay gaps, and on a range of perspectives. And this was a really unique data set as well. Most of this data was collected between February and July of this year, and this is a really unique opportunity we have to launch it, but it's just the start of where this data set goes. So as you can see on the next slide, our participant nationalities, we had participants from over 70 different nationalities, nations worldwide. We saw about 43% of participants in the first study on individual experiences, part of the public sector. About 36% were from the private sector, and about 15% came from the intergovernmental organisations. When we looked at the types of roles of participants who participated, we saw everyone from astronauts to entrepreneurs to scientists and researchers, program managers to policy officers, business development, finance, human resources, and a whole range of advocates as well. In the next slide, we actually go to women's experiences, and I'll break down some of the key findings. So if we go to the next slide, and the next one after that, we really wanted to start with understanding, well, how are women getting to the space sector in the first place? What we found from our data set was that for 53% of women, they made a very deliberate choice to join the space sector. This was something they'd always wanted to do, something that they were always passionate about. However, we also found that quite a significant proportion of women had actually come from other sectors first. And this shows the potential for a lot of lateral transfers across the sector. When we're thinking about building representation of women, they might not have always had space in mind. So for a decent proportion that, they happened into the sector. And really interestingly, about 64% had a STEM-related degree, and we hear a lot about encouraging more women into STEM, but it's really, really important to note that almost a quarter of respondents actually studied something other than STEM, and this really highlights that alternative pathways and also other non-STEM qualifications are also really important pathways to space. And I think this should give a lot of our employing organisations some opportunities when it comes to looking at where are our next space sector leaders coming from. When we then go to the next slide, we really wanted to also understand women's perceptions around gender and space. What we found was that 58% believe that girls and boys are not equally encouraged to study some of those subjects that might be seen as a natural path to a space career. So that might be STEM subjects, for instance. We also found that quite a high proportion, so 65%, think that women do not receive the same social evaluation and respect as men in the sector. We found that roughly half believe that women and entrepreneurs and scientists don't receive the same funding, and this is backed up by other insights across the sector, and that 57% think that women do not receive the same professional development opportunities as men in the sector. So we can start to see some real trends in insights around perspectives when it comes to gender and space. If we go to the next slide, we also really wanted to dig into experiences. So as Anne-Claire mentioned, we started to understand representation in phase 1. But going beyond representation, it's really clear that even if, numeric parity is reached in certain domains or in certain countries, that doesn't tell us much about, well, what's it actually like. We did find lots of positive stories, but we also found a prevalence of women's reported experiences of discrimination, harassment, and bullying, which is of high concern. So 1 in 7 experienced physical harassment, 1 in 6 experienced sexual harassment, 1 in 5 have experienced bullying, 1 in 3 have experienced overt bias and discrimination, and almost half have experienced some form of covert bias in the space sector. These are real statistics, but they have real stories behind them too, and to do justice to women's stories and also improving that safety is a real big concern for the sector going forwards. Concerningly, about 62% of those who had experienced one of these sorts of experiences, or maybe multiple, they were able to do something about it. So that is a good news. So there is, in general, most people, if something happened, they did feel like they could do something about it. But of those who did do something about it, more participants felt that their organisation's response wasn't adequate than those who felt that it was. So we've seen some real opportunities for organisations in this space. If we have a look at the next slide, I've just captured a few small insights because one of the big priorities for this study was to understand some of that intersecting data around not just gender, but around race, around disability, around caring responsibilities. We found things like comments like being neurodivergent has influenced my experience in the space sector in positive and also in challenging ways. People found a lot of experiences of discrimination or lack of opportunities to progress, particularly when it came to having children. We found a don't ask, don't tell policy, and that kind of feelings around a double burden or having to work harder, particularly for those women who have disabilities, being treated as potential sexual partners and not necessarily feeling safe in their workplaces, or even feeling like they are made to feel unreliable or weren't given promotion opportunities at work. So we got some really, really rich data that's been very, very helpful for informing kind of future directions from here. If we go to the next slide, you can see that most participants, kind of despite some of what has been going on, most participants were satisfied with their organisation's benefits and conditions. So that's really good to hear. It's things like support to travel or take up opportunities, conferences or events, for instance. However, 1/3, so a pretty big proportion, were dissatisfied when it came particularly to future career opportunities and thinking about what that forwards progression would be. We also found that more than 1/4 were dissatisfied when it came to pay and remuneration. If we go to the next slide, this really matters because when we're actually thinking about what are the push and pull factors that either encourage women to stay in the sector or maybe encourage them to leave the sector, we find things like future career opportunities being really, really important to women's motivations to stay. So there needs to be seen that there is some sort of future trajectory that is, moving forwards, that is progressing, that they have a space and a role, maybe leadership opportunities. That's really important for keeping women in the sector. But things that impact them and maybe push them out of the sector do include things like a lack of work-life balance. And that was kind of a factor that would motivate, a majority of participants to leave if they weren't able to achieve that sort of flexibility. I guess underpinning it all, and this will surprise probably very few of you, that ability to do exciting or meaningful work is also really important for staying in the sector. So I think we've got some really good hooks there and some things to work on and strengthen. When we then go to the next slide, we see that about 57% believe that gender equality in the sector is either progressing or strongly progressing. So that's most women who were surveyed do believe that progress is being made. However, in the last 12 months, there is considerably less optimism. So about only 1/3 believe the same. And further to that, about 29% noted that they had experienced backlash or pushback to gender equality in some domain. So we've got some real opportunities to make sure that we embed gender equality in an ongoing way. If we look to the next slide, we also asked women what works. What have they seen work in their workplaces or in the sector when it comes to gender equality, women's representation and experiences? we found that more than 1 in 5 reported being aware of some sort of solution that worked, and that much of these solutions were what UNOOSA's Space4Women initiative already does. So this is some really good news and quite reinforcing for the work that is being done here. So things that worked can seem pretty simple, things like hiring more women, so achieving that critical mass, not just across specific roles, but across leadership levels as well. Implementing things like equal pay policies, having candid discussions with co-workers and with leaders about some of the issues that were going on, as well as kind of what's working and what we can build on. Accountability and having consequences for perpetrators, particularly when it came to sexual harassment or other forms of discrimination. Having data transparency and actually having, I guess, that access to see what is actually going on within an organisation. Mentoring programs and outreach to other women in the sector. Being able to raise awareness and be transparent about the continued issues where they exist and acknowledge, I guess, that there is a journey towards progress. Networking groups, including initiatives like the UNOOSA Space4Women spaces and mentoring opportunities. Being able to reframe some of that space sector language and recruitment in ads to appeal to women. Quotas and targets, and of course, role models and making sure they're accessible and achievable. So that was the findings from study 1. If we go into study 2 on the private sector though, and we go to the next page, next 2 slides. So for our study on the private sector, as Anne-Claire said, we repeated this study, the same study that was done last year with the public sector, we repeated it with private sector. And specifically, this is a case study of 41 kind of new space, typically smaller SMEs or entrepreneurs who are operating in the space sector. So I guess just a caution, this isn't necessarily generalizable to the wider private sector. However, it does give us a really good insight into this kind of new space actors. Really excitingly, what we found is that compared to the public sector, the private sector SMEs, they are roughly similar in terms of women's representation, which is at about 31% compared to 30% in the public sector. But actually, as you get more senior, women's representation increases, which is kind of the opposite to what we might have expected. So women are roughly 40% of managers in these organisations. They're about 38% of leadership or C-suite roles and 50% of board roles, which is really, really phenomenal. However, very similar to the public sector, we see that women are overrepresented in part-time or casual or equivalent work, comprising about 56% of those part-time workers in private sector organisations. So going to the next slide. When we break down women's representation across portfolios, again, we see some really surprising findings. So, for instance, in the public sector, women represent roughly only 30% of astronaut training programs. Yet in these private sector organisations, women actually represent about 66% of astronaut training programs. When we have a look at education and outreach, proportions are roughly similar, same with human resources, administrative roles, legal and policy roles, as well as scientific and technical roles. And that scientific and technical roles is where we tend to see women least represented across both public and private sector. So that's unsurprising. And it's also unsurprising that we see women more highly represented in human resources and administrative roles. And it really highlights that we still have some work to do to make sure that women are represented across the spectrum of roles and that men are represented across the spectrum of roles as well. If we go to the next slide. Again, much like the public sector organisations, we were able to correlate between those organisations who had achieved higher representation of women or who had achieved parity. What did they actually do? What we found is that those organisations who had achieved parity were much more likely to set quotas for women's representation. So about 1/5 of organisations had actually done that versus none of the organisations who had not achieved parity. They're also over 3 times more likely to have an internal organisation-facing policy that related to gender equality or women's leadership. So they kind of set intentions. They were over 2 times as likely to have guidelines or act to ensure gender representation in things like international or national delegations, conferences, and panels. They were over 2 times as likely to contribute to or to undertake research, again, highlighting that really important part about data and transparency. They were almost twice as likely to have a gender mainstreaming policy. And as mentioned earlier, if you haven't come across UNOOSA's Gender Mainstreaming Toolkit before, I highly recommend you check it out. You don't have to redesign the wheel. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. We've got all the resources that are already there, good to go for organisations to implement. They're also twice as likely to have and use gender-sensitive funding. This was really, really interesting. Quite a number of organisations said, hey, we actually care about our supply chain and we make sure that we're also supporting other women-owned enterprises in our supply chain. Finally, they're also more likely to voice rhetorical support for gender equality and women's participation. So we know some really good things that are correlated with higher representation of women. If we go to the next slide, we've got some learnings. So we've got recommendations and we've got further steps, and you can get into more detail in the actual report. But one thing that was really clear from the data was that that workers across the sector want more action on gender equality in the sector. And actually, space SMEs, those new space startups and enterprises that we worked with, they're actually doing more relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion, not less. So we're seeing an increased investment across the space sector, which is also really phenomenal to see. We've got some recommendations on steps organisations can take. So there's some really basic stuff around strengthening commitment to gender equality. And you might want to think about understanding your own data, what's happening in your own organisation. It could be really simple steps too, like actually voicing support publicly or within your organisation for gender equality. That also always helps, even though it's a low-hanging fruit. It's part of creating a culture where this matters. Going beyond that, though, it's really important to put investment behind that rhetorical commitment and behind action. So things like policies, revisiting your policies, flexible work opportunities, equal pay, leadership progression, mentorship, professional development opportunities, and looking at things like employee safety in particular, as well as thinking about how are you expanding role modelling and mentorship programs. And on that note, again, as Anne-Claire mentioned, actually being involved in initiatives like UNOOSA's Space4Women future studies, mentoring programs, as well as expert meetings can be a really phenomenal way, not just to learn from yourself and learn from our reports, but to learn from each other, because you all have a huge amount of lived experience as well as learnings on what's working kind of on the ground that can really, really help. And third, please do delve into phase 1 and phase 2 research outcomes and the Gender Mainstreaming Toolkit as we go into far more detail about what's happening, what works, and what are some recommendations for the future. If we go to the final slide, when we actually combine some of these actions, so Sustainable Development Goals, Space 2030 agenda, and huge amount of commitment, not just from states, but from individuals who are passionate about the sector, then pursuing gender equality in the space sector is not just critical and necessary, it's the right thing to do, and it will be such an enormous benefit to this sector going forward. So thank you again to all of the partners who supported this research and to all of the women who contributed. And I'm very happy to take any questions or comments as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elise, for these very comprehensive presentations about the content of the study. Really, thank you so much. I think also something that our audience will notice as a difference from the first report to the second report is that in the second report, we actually kept the quotes from the women who responded. And some of them are actually very striking. You can really size, what kind of story they experience. And I think this is really a big difference. And also something that we also notice, For the private sector part, the new space actors are actually very good students when it comes to gender equality within their own walls. So I think this is a very good trend, and I think it's really good also to notice that, and potentially they could also forge a path for the public sector also to go into that direction. So thank you so much. And I think we have a few questions in the chat. I have spotted already some of them. Some of them are not related directly to the study itself or its content, but there is a question from Ellen. She says that in Eritrea, women have historically played in national struggles, making up 30%, and today we see this reflected in education, with women achieving 50% representation in higher level STEM schools, which is remarkable for a developing country. How can initiatives like Space4Women build on such successes to create clear pathways for these women into the global space sector, particularly in regions where opportunities after education are limited? Yes, so thank you so much, Hélène, for that question. Actually, this also introduced one next activity for the Space4Women program. That was one of the outcomes from the 5th expert meeting in Kenya. One of these outcomes was to develop a STEM education toolkit for women and girls from underprivileged communities. So this is something that we are working on. And as you said, we will conduct a global consultation to collect also feedback and resources from everyone, from all the type of stakeholders. So I think also your input will be very valuable for us as well. So I think we can keep this conversation going, Ellen, on this specific issue. Thank you so much for your question. There was also another question from Catherine. Is the Space4Women an active mentoring and coaching program of UNOOSA? I coordinated before with Simulta de People for possibility to have a Space4Women Philippines. Yes, indeed. One of the outcomes also from the last expert meeting was to sort of delocalize the action of the program and to have local or national or regional groups for Space4Women. So this is also something that we would like to do as well. And I think we need to also collect the input from our beneficiaries and see concretely how we can operate that. But I think, Catherine, this is also a conversation that we can have separately, specifically on that. But yes, this is an objective of the program, and we hope that we will be to implement that very soon. There was another question from Redima. I'm genuinely interested in understanding how Space4Women envisions the practical implementation of its mitigation strategies, especially in light of the global shift towards more conservative policies. In many cases, women are being reduced to symbolic DEI hires, which undermines their careers despite their high qualifications and contributions. This trend is particularly damaging for women from the global south, who face compounded challenges compared to their Western counterparts. Given this context, how does Space4Women plan to move beyond recommendations and policies to drive concrete collective action? What specific policy mechanisms or interventions are being pursued to ensure meaningful support and equity for all women in the space sector? So our action is actually all about that. And for instance, one of our concrete action was to develop the gender mainstreaming toolkit, which has been mentioned several times already during our session, which is a very concrete tool that everyone, any organization can use and can concretely apply within their own context, whatever it is, public or private. It's very tangible. Actually, at the end of the toolkit, you have a checklist that can directly be used by the organization or any entity, and it is actually very effective. So what we're trying to do is to promote such product as much as possible, conducting some awareness raising activities, also promoting and discussing more thoroughly during our expert meeting to also come up with solutions to drive concrete results, and also to have all this beautiful recommendation implemented. So thank you for your question. So Maya, how can I help in your programs for improving the experience of women? Well, so Maya, you can actually help to disseminate what Space4Women in UNOOSA does, and especially our study and the gender mainstreaming toolkit, and also being a participant at our expert meetings. Cheryl, how can we get more involved with the research being done at UNOOSA? I'm representing women in aerospace medicine, an international organization with both students and professionals in aerospace and healthcare fields. We would love to collaborate. With pleasure, Cheryl. Maybe you didn't receive the call for contribution for this phase of the study, but we will be sure that you receive the next one. And the same, anytime that there is a call for participants for any activities of UNOOSA, please apply. We will be really happy to have you. Also, when we will resume the mentorship program, hopefully next year, potentially you could be one of our mentors. Why not? Joconda, what measures are currently being implemented to reduce these gaps? Are there any specific corporate policies addressing this issue? Well, this is actually following up on the last question, the last question that was related to that. So I think here our gender mainstreaming toolkit really makes sense, and we're really trying to have it disseminated globally, but also implemented, trying really to drive the implementation and to showcase also how it can be implemented. Last year at the last expert meeting, for instance, we got a special session on how to champion the implementation of the gender mainstreaming toolkits. And we got people from space agencies, but also space private entities.
And Claire, if I can just jump in here too, if you're really interested in seeing what are the most commonly used or prevalent policies or measures that organizations that have achieved parity are doing, please do check out the phase 1 and phase 2 study, because we have carefully correlated those organizations or countries that have achieved parity with the initiatives, so policies, but also other sorts of initiatives, like did they fund, I don't know, kind of initiatives for women and girls, or what else did they do? Now, we can't say that that causes, more women. However, we can make those correlations, and there are some really, really clear ones. So if you're trying to work out what are the most effective policies or most effective interventions, that's somewhere that I would recommend to start. And I think, some of it's pretty simple. Like the thing that struck me the most with this recent study was actually, if you have an organizational policy, just any old organizational policy that says actually gender equality matters to our organization, you're already much more likely to have achieved parity. So there's some of this stuff, it's not rocket science. In some cases, it's much harder, but it's something that we know how to do. And it is achievable. So definitely check out the reports.
Thank you, Elise. Definitely check out the report and tell us what you think. And actually, I see a lot of questions about what comes next, what should be the future of this. And actually, this is, I think, the moment that you were so looking for, because we're gonna ask you to actually tell us more about what do you think should come next. So I will just ask Martin to stop sharing oh yes, so please join us on mentormentor.com. You can actually scan the QR code here on the screen, or you can also tape the code 93023345 on menti.com. And I will then share my screen so that we can see our results directly live. So please just join us on menti.com, and so we can start in 30 seconds. We will have 4 questions for you, and this will really help us to drive our next phase, because we will have actually a next phase for this study. So, oh, I see already some questions, some inputs there. Okay, let me share my screen then. All right. What is the most important challenge or opportunity for gender equality in the space sector moving forward? Scholarships, overcoming bias, navigate backlash, breaking down barriers, support organizations, bias a lot, yeah. Getting male allies, yes, actually that was something that was highlighted during the last expert meeting as well. We really said that, because actually there were a lot of male into the room with us, and we were very happy about that, because it's not always the case. So we concluded that this is really something we need to work on. We need much more male allies, as you said. Scholarship is a big word. I see cultural norms. More investment, well, definitely. Communication, funding, yes, more investment. All right. Great, let's go to the next one. Next question. What questions should future research on gender in the space sector try to answer, in your opinion? And here you're allowed to input more words. How developing countries' women can get invited in space, which policies and interventions have positive effects. Yes, definitely. This is also something very tangible that we're trying to understand. What are the retention barriers? Longitudinal changes, which countries are improving? Why? What did they do since phase 1? Yes, exactly. So this will also come with will be reflected in the last question. Factor leading to retention. How to create partnership. And funding landscape. Why there is less investment to women lead space tech? Yeah, definitely. This is something that we actually noticed in our study, as Elise highlighted it. How to overcome gender gap. Why should we try to fit in a model not designed for us? Yeah. How does culture need to change to fully embrace a diverse workforce for space? Why do people leave the industry? Why do women leave actually? How to manage menstruation in microgravity? Well, yes, definitely. This is also something that we can dive into. Equity, how can women step into leadership? Yes, this is also something that we studied during the first phase, because we studied the gender representation in the public space sector, but also across the different roles, the board role, the C-suite roles, and so on. Private sector primes data. That is a lot of input. How have backlash and resistance tactics towards women been employed, and by which companies or countries? Case studies and national comparisons. Okay. How can we unite with other marginalized groups? That's also a good question. All right, let's go to the third question. And this is a bit more personal this time. What kind of tools, platforms, or initiative would help you or your organization promote gender equality in the space sector? what would help you or your organization? STEM learning resources. Well, great. This is actually on the program. Workshop for women, scholarship for internship, yes. Funding for equity initiatives, localized movement with support from UNOOSA. Yes, we have talked about it 10 minutes ago. Platform for collaboration in work, research, education. A data collection framework or template that I could roll out for my organization. Yes, and I think we're gonna talk about that in a moment. Mentorship programs, sure. Funding or independent research, mentorship, wonderful. Oh, that's a lot. Lectures, in-person free STEM programs, funding for mentorships again, equity through binding regulations, backup data that shows women aren't making it up, the barriers are real. Oh yes, that's true. Localized regional with help with UNOOSA, yes. Wonderful. Visibility platforms, good standards and SOP, yes, definitely. That's also related to the gender mainstreaming toolkits. Expanded toolkits that cater to the needs of different organizations, supporting their growth and providing rewards through both quantitative and qualitative measures. Setting equity as an international standard under the sustainability umbrella. Building networks of solidarity among women in the space sector, particularly across common cultural spheres and through regional networks. Wonderful, wonderful. All right, so I think now we'll have to go to the final question, which is, how important is it to have a global mechanism to monitor, track, showcase progress on gender equality in the space sector? That's actually a hint about what, oh, right, oh, okay. Extremely important. I think there is unanimity here. Does someone disagree? All right, well, I think this is quite clear on that one. All right, so this is actually a hint about what should come next. For the third phase, actually, we would like to have a global mechanism where we could monitor and track over time what are the progresses of gender equality in the time, and something that can be also visible and revisited each 2 or 3 years, something like that. And that could also be very useful when it comes to monitoring the progress against SDG 5, for instance. So this is also something that we would like to implement next. All right, thank you so much. I think, Martin, you can share your screen again. Because I only would like you to see one final QR code, because if you didn't have the time to answer our very quick survey on Menti, you can actually tell us a bit more about your ideas and share a bit more with us through our final survey. And this will definitely help us to shape what activities are there for the future, what we can do next with what we have already done. So with that, I would like to thank all of you for staying for exactly an hour with us. Thank you so much, and thank you for your participation. We really appreciate that. I think it's a very important topic, and we look forward to seeing you at our next activities. Thank you so much. Have a great end of the day. Goodbye.